Hello, honeys. I am back with more sweet treats from you in the form of news updates from last calendar week. Before we begin, I wanted to remind you that we will be dropping our second ever guest special in just a couple of days here, featuring someone very near and dear to my heart as well as my art historical journey, Chief Curator at the Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art, Lauren O'Connell. We're honored that she took time to interview with us and provide you answers to all kinds of questions related to curation and the workings of that particular museum. And speaking of guest specials, yours truly was recently a guest interviewee on a different podcast. I was invited by Ryan McDougall of the podcast Solo Spotlight to talk about art history and my experience with it and how it translated to podcasting. So if you'd like to hear a little bit more about my story and how exactly art history works in the real world, please go ahead and check out our little collaboration there. And last but absolutely not least, happy Pride, honeys. Happy June. Hope you're all planning to enjoy, celebrate, and love yourselves, whoever you are, this month. Now let's freaking get started already. Forever in first, our follow-ups for the week. We heard that James Rondeau has returned as the director of the Art Institute of Chicago following that plane incident. The institution's statements on the matter said that the board leadership had conducted an independent investigation into the incident and is confident, quote, in James Rondeau's leadership and ability to continue as the president and director of the museum, end quote. Rondeau's own statement was full of regret, but for, quote, the impact it has had on the museum and my colleagues, end quote, saying that he's grateful to continue to have the opportunity to work for the Institute after dedicating the past 27 years of his professional career to it. We also received confirmation that the 2026 Venice Biennale will honor the late curator Koyo Kouo's vision. Organizers of the Venice Biennale announced May 27th that the 61st edition of the event would proceed according to the plan laid out by its curator before her May 10th death from cancer. Kouo was not only the chief curator of the Zeitz MoCA in Cape Town, but also the first African woman chosen to curate the Biennale. She'd been working on the main exhibition for 7 months and was just days away from revealing its theme when she passed. Kouo's vision will be realized by 5 advisors with whom she'd been working very closely, chosen herself. These are curators Gabe Beckhurst Faiju, Marie-Helene Pereira, and Rashi Salti, as well as the Biennale's editor-in-chief and critic-at-large Siddhartha Mitter, and team assistant / pro researcher Rory Sapai. We're excited to see the VB when it opens. The Centre Pompidou announced last week that it will open a new Brazil satellite, the museum's first in South America. The French institution will expand its international reach via its first South American space set to open in November 2027, even as its Paris home base closes for 5 years to undergo renovations. The new location in Foz do Iguaçu, Brazil, will be one of several satellites operated by the center, joining others that exist in Shanghai, Malaga, and Metz, France, among other locales. It will, quote, focus on spotlighting artists from South America while also foregrounding parts of the Pompidou's permanent collection, end quote, which is itself around 150,000 objects. The project is notably receiving financial backing from Parana officials who oversee the territory around the UNESCO World Heritage Site Iguaçu Falls. It will be designed by Paraguayan architect Solano Benite to include exhibition galleries as well as research facilities. We also learned that a museum has removed a Maori artist's work inviting viewers to walk on the New Zealand flag. The flag artwork, printed with the phrase, "Please walk on me," is a new version of a 1995 piece titled Flagging the Future. It was on view in a solo show for an artist named Diane Prince, who is of the Nga Puhi, the Ngati Watua, and the Ngati Kahu peoples, which occurred at the Suter Art Gallery in Nelson. However, it recently gained major negative publicity, the show did, when Ruth Tipu, a Nelson resident, said she would pick the flag up off the ground every single day in protest of the artwork. After that headline and subsequent videos of Tipu picking up the flag began circulating on social media, debates about cultural heritage and political respectfulness intensified online and began to divide local community members as well as politicians. For complete context, though, honeys, the work in question also includes an assortment of found objects. For example, the 1995 version included korari, a form of flax which is common to New Zealand, and harakeke flowers, which Maori communities have woven to form mats, cloths, and baskets. caskets. The organizer of the show, the Pataka Art and Museum, has responded that it would remove the piece in light of the public response to it, saying, quote, "This should not be interpreted as a judgment on the artwork or the artist's intent. We continue to support freedom of expression and the vital role that art plays in reflecting and shaping national conversations in a democratic society," end quote. That last sentence, I'll admit, honey, seems pretty contradictory to me. I find myself wondering, how can you have national conversations, democratic conversations about artwork without the artwork? But I digress for now. And it wouldn't really be Pride Month unless we covered how a court has recently ruled that Lil Nas X did not, in fact, steal a photographer's poses. The May 16th decision in favor of the rapper was delivered by Judge Kenneth K. Lee of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit and made public knowledge last week. This was a decision upholding a 2023 ruling by a California district court finding a lack of evidence to justify copyright infringement charges. This decision ended a 3-year-long legal battle. The courts ultimately dismissed the lawsuit brought by a photographer named Rodney Woodland, who claimed that Lil Nas X copied poses and artistic concepts used in Woodland's Instagram posts in the rapper's own album covers and social media posts. Courts found there were not enough similarities between Woodland's and the entertainer's photos, noting differences in motifs, arrangements, backgrounds, lighting, colors, physical features of the subjects, and more. A tough loss for Woodland, but an important thing when we see these copyright infringement cases. They have to have enough evidence. And in a bombshell headline from last week, multiple artists claimed they are owed money by London's Arusha Gallery. 10 artists accused the London Gallery of failing to pay nearly $700,000 US in long overdue payments in a joint statement to the art newspaper on Thursday of last week, and the next day, several more artists reached out to Art News to complain about the gallery's conduct and claimed they were also owed payments. These artists claimed that they have faced, quote, extreme difficulty obtaining payment for sold work, often waiting months or even years to receive funds owed, end quote. Our sources for today provided the example of Charlotte Keats, who, according to her lawyer, John Sharples, has the largest grievance. She said she's owed £430,000 or $580,000 US from the sales of artworks dating back to 2023, but due to the lack of a legal written agreement, everything was done verbally in her case, the gallery is arguing her complaint. We also have artist Plum Cloutman, who told Art News that she's owed around $3,000 from the sales of a show held 1 year ago at Arusha, and that her consignment agreement's window for payment has passed. Here's where things get funky, at least in my opinion, honeys. In a statement to the art newspaper, Arusha Gallery blamed late payments and dropping sales both on the art market's recent stagnation, stating that it saw, quote, performance drop off sharply and unexpectedly in 2024 and into 2025, end quote, and on the unexpected January death of its gallery co-owner, Guy Roland Maxwell Bargery. Arusha Gallery said in part that it has been working, quote, exceptionally hard through a crisis to turn things around over recent months, end quote, including scaling back operations and making good faith agreements with creditors. This is all well and good, yet, despite these financial struggles, the gallery is still moving forward with plans to build a wellness and exhibition space on the outskirts of the Brecon Beacons National Park in Wales. I'm thinking, I don't know, settle your debts to artists first, maybe? A headline I'm sure the honeys have been waiting for me to bring up because it was truly everywhere last week. Harvard relinquished photographs of enslaved people in a historic settlement. The Massachusetts school announced Wednesday of last week that it would transfer 15 daguerreotypes dated to around 1850, long kept in the Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology, to the International African American Museum in Charleston, South Carolina, in order to settle an 8-year dispute with the lone descendant of the subjects captured in said photos. Due to the agreement's confidential nature, there's only so much I can tell you, but Tamara Lanier had sued Harvard under the argument that the university had no legal claim to these images, being that they were taken without consent, on commission for the Swiss-born biologist Louis Agassiz, a former Harvard professor who's now widely discredited as a proponent of controversial theories around white superiority. Scholars consider these photos the earliest surviving photos of enslaved African Americans. Lanier describes them as, quote, dehumanizing, end quote. That first legal case was dismissed in 2021 because the presiding judge ruled that the images had not been her ancestors' property, so did not rightfully belong to her. But the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, though it it upheld that same ruling a year later, decided that Lanier could sue for emotional distress caused by Harvard's promotional use of the photos showing her ancestors Renty and his daughter Delia stripped to the waist. Before getting into the reason we all know this is notable, I do want to quickly acknowledge that Lanier made contact with Aguiz's descendants who contacted the university on her behalf and otherwise supported her efforts in the process of this lawsuit. We love that they did the right thing. And Lanier's attorneys called this restitution a, quote, singular victory for descendants of the enslaved, end quote, in their statements to press, pointing out that the return comes at a very critical time for Harvard. The university right now is facing targeting by the Trump administration related to its handling of Palestinian solidarity campaigns on campus, as well as the dismantlement of DEI efforts, and that's not even mentioning the dismantlement of DEI and other historical efforts across public institutions nationwide. Said one of these attorneys, Ben Crump, quote, "It is so critically important when we think about this epidemic of white supremacy that has resurfaced and reared its ugly head that we know there are champions for equal justice that stand up to the enemies of equality. There's never a wrong time to do the right thing," end quote. Lanier herself said, quote, "Institutions that hold the spoils of slavery must do more than reflect, they must act. Justice requires no less," end quote. The French publication Le Monde also reported Wednesday that the Louvre will return 258 works from the Rothschild Cabinet of Curiosities. Collector Adele de Rothschild of the illustrious French banking family bequeathed her private mansion and the entirety of its contents to the French government with one condition prior to her 1922 death, that her cabinet of curiosities remain intact. Of course, we know from this headline that did not happen, as the pieces from her collection were distributed among the major cultural destinations of Paris, and 258 works from that cabinet ended up in the Louvre in violation of this rule, as was discovered in a 2019 collections inventory. So, honeys, I can already hear you asking, why does this matter? It is a serious mistake. We, as public stewards, as caretakers on behalf of the public of artifacts of our past, must honor the requests of those who give us things. Otherwise, they don't give us things and we don't have museums. I mean, that's a simple version, but you get it. So what's next here? The Louvre will hold on to about 30 objects once inventoried as part of the cabinet for about the next 5 years to allow for time to find suitable replacements for them. The museum itself will also receive 104 pieces from its inventory that were in the safekeeping from a National Arts Foundation as compensation for the loss as well. At the same time, that foundation has begun planning the reintegration of the 200-ish art and objects back into the cabinet as closely as possible to Rothschild's original design. It's set to be completed and on public view by September. And some good news for London's local art scene, the Camden Art Centre has gotten a 99-year lease on its current home. The centre announced Tuesday of last week that it had raised the £1.9 million it needed to secure this lease. It was previously due to expire in 2027. According to our sources, the center has, quote, a record of mounting a forward-thinking program, end quote. They notably staged a Hilma F. Clint show more than a decade before the Guggenheim's record-breaking retrospective, and artist Jesse Darling received his 2023 Turner Prize for his show at the Camden Art Center. Its director, Martin Clark, said, quote, "This is an extraordinary achievement for the charity and provides much-needed financial resilience following significant recent cuts to our public funding. On the occasion of our 60th anniversary, I can think of no better way to both celebrate our past and look with confidence to our future," end quote. A round of applause for the Camden and their fantastic fundraising abilities. And moving into our discoveries and announcements section for the week, a 300-pound bust stolen from Jim Morrison's grave in 1988 has been recovered. The bust, by Croatian artist Mladen Mikulin, was created for the 10th anniversary of the Doors' frontman's death in 1971, but only stood on his grave in the famous Père Lachaise cemetery in Paris for only 7 years, gathering graffiti and suffering some tourist damage before it was taken. The cemetery itself is famous for containing the graves of Honoré de Balzac, Edith Piaf, Marcel Proust, Oscar Wilde, and more. All the same, the whole bust disappeared without a trace one summer evening in 1988, though some claim they saw 2 men peeling away with it on a moped, while others argue that the cemetery hid it away for safekeeping. It was gone in any case until earlier this month when French police announced they'd recovered it during an unrelated investigation. Whether the bust will return to Morrison's grave is still unclear. We also heard about the development of a new rice noodle-like glue for historical paintings that is putting art conservators' fears to rest. Researchers from the School of Polymer Science and Polymer Engineering at Ohio's University of Akron and New York University's Conservation Center of the Institute of Fine Arts have developed a new, safer version of the discontinued yet crucial adhesive called BEVA 371. The product is also known as Berger's ethylene vinyl acetate 371, created in 1972 and named after the Austrian-American conservator who created it and passed in 2006. It was revolutionary at its time because it did not darken the paint layers by seeping into the original canvas, so it quickly was adopted across the industry. The new substance, called BEVA 371 Akron, is a pre-mixed heat seal variant like the original formula, but is less susceptible to supply chain issues, is less toxic, it's easier to transport because the spaghetti-like form that it comes in can be cut into pellets. It also is solvent-free, so no damage to the artworks. Forms to cater to various conservation needs, so huge boon for the industry. Said Paul Ackroyd, a conservator at the National Gallery in London, quote, "With its advances in materials innovation and sustainability, the project is a shining example of how successful collaboration can be in a niche industry like ours," end quote, which was really worried about its ability to continue conserving. Way to go, polymers. Also last week, remains of an ancient Mayan complex spread across 3 cities called Los Abuelos, Petnal, and Cambrayal were uncovered in northern Guatemala by a joint Guatemalan and Slovak team as part of the Huaxtun Regional Archaeological Project. Los Abuelos itself was dated back to the Middle Preclassic period, or 800 to 500 BCE, by the researchers on the project. The site is thought to be, quote, "one of the most ancient and important ceremonial centers," end quote, in the area. What's even more exciting here, honeys, is that sanctuaries, a pyramid, and a unique canal system at these sites indicate connections among, quote, "a previously unknown urban triangle," end quote, which could help experts to better understand pre-Hispanic Pittins' social, political, religious landscapes. A necessary obituary from the week, honeys, for Sebastião Salgado, an unflinching documentary photographer who died at the age of 81 in Paris on Friday, May 23rd, as confirmed by the reforestation nonprofit Instituto Terra, owned by him and his wife. Of him, Hyperallergic says, quote, "spurred on by a desire to document his encounters and surroundings, the Brazilian photographer captured the realities of marginalized people around the world," end quote. We also learned that the D.C. street where abstract painter Alma Thomas lived and worked has been renamed in her honor. Thomas, who lived 1891 to 1978, had a trailblazing career in the arts and was notable for her abstract expressionist ventures. The new Alma Thomas Way street signs can be found on the corners of 15th and Church Streets, as well as 15th and Q Streets at either end of the block. This is the block in which the artist maintained a studio for over 70 years in a property that was originally purchased by her parents in 1907 when she was 16. Thomas lived there until her death at 86 years old, and the artist's sister, J. Maurice Thomas, had the property listed on the National Register of Historic Places, though the addition of the renaming makes this even more hallowed New York City art historical legacy ground. And our last couple of stories for the day, honeys. First, a British investor has offered to acquire ArtNet amid its financial struggles. Beowulf Capital firm, run by investor Andrew Evan Wolf, has offered a voluntary public takeover of ArtNet AG, the company that runs the similarly named art market website and news outlet ArtNet, aka one of our regular sources. You can see why we chose to feature this story. As of May 27th, ArtNet AG is offering the remaining shareholders £11.25 per share in cash, a 97% premium over the undisturbed share price calculated March 3rd. Beowulf's bid already has backing from 65% of ArtNet's shareholders, including Wang Fine Art AG, which had previously hinted at a possible sale. Most of the managing and supervisory boards of ArtNet say they support this move. There are several reasons we care about this headline beyond our ability to continue using this source. The sale could see the company go private after more than 2 decades of being publicly listed on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. And in spite of how big of a deal it is under big pressure. Despite ArtNet's brand recognition and 67 million annual users, yours truly one of them, it struggled to turn profits, reporting a 1.9 million euro loss for 2023, according to the German business newspaper newspaper Handelsblatt, and this was a steeper shortfall than the previous year. The liquidity of the company nearly halved over the same period, leaving it with just over €500,000 in cash. It's also worth keeping an eye on Beowulf's growing ambition in the art tech sectors, as the firm also earlier this year acquired a controlling interest in Artsy, the online art marketplace. Wolf has been touting the firm's plans to create a data-driven, quote, symbiotic ecosystem, end quote, powered by AI. And as you all know, the debate has been raging very heavily in the art world over where AI should and should not exist for us. So we'll see what happens next. We received word last week that online bidding is already exceeding $56,000 at the time of reporting for hundreds of items from filmmaker and later painter David Lynch's personal estate, which are up for auction via Julien's in LA. The sale includes nearly 450 lots spanning Lynch's career as a filmmaker and will officially end June 18th. Standout pieces reportedly include Lynch's personal 35mm print of his 1977 debut feature Eraserhead and a signed edition of a Man Ray photograph depicting an unknown subject's hands. If you want it, honeys, get it now. And finally, it came to our attention that the iconic Chrysler building in New York is now for sale. The 1,046-foot-tall building was commissioned by the car company founder Walter P. Chrysler, who called it a, quote, monument to me, end quote, and was constructed between 1928 and 1930. It briefly was the tallest structure in the world until the Empire State Building was completed in 1931. But real estate experts say it has fallen into disrepair since one co-owner, the Australian real estate company Cigna, filed for insolvency in 2023, and the other, an American development company called RFR, stopped paying rent. According to New York Times' Anna Code, tenants complained of faulty elevators, murky water fountains, and pests in spite of the building's iconic status. Said real estate broker Ruth Culp-Haber to the New York Times last summer, quote, it's arguably the most famous building in the world. However, the windows are smaller than a Hudson Yards building. It doesn't have all the amenities that so many other trophy buildings have, end quote. A business called Cooper Union is now working with the real estate firm Savills to manage the sale of the tower, and we of course care because of the repairs, renovations, and changes that it could lead to. And there is our report for the week, honeys. I did forget to make one more shout out at the beginning of our episode, so I'll make it now, and that's for my cousin Daniel, who's graduating high school this week. Congrats, buddy. Love you. And of course, I love all of you as well, honeys. Thank you for tuning in once again for your weekly update. We appreciate your listenership and your dedication to the arts and or our show. Until next time, you know the drill. Take care of yourselves, hydrate or dehydrate, and we will talk soon. This podcast is produced, created, hosted, formerly edited, and fact-checked by master's degree holder Celia Bugno. Chris Meinhold is responsible for our editing, mixing, and our intro and outro music. Special thanks to him for that. And as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, comment, so on all your favorite listening as well as social media channels.